I want to welcome everyone to what I call the virtual world of the East Side Freedom Library. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is a really special treat for me, for us, two wonderful artists, activists, and longtime friends of mine and Beth's and of each other, Keith Christensen and Mike Alewitz. At the East Side Freedom Library, art has been a very important part of how we encourage people to tell their stories and engage each other's stories. We think art is a moving force in our society, or at least can be. What we're going to do tonight is, and this is really prompted by the imminent opening of Keith's show at MCAD, at the MFA Gallery at MCAD, has inspired us to put this together this evening. Keith is going to show a slide show of some of his work, which doesn't mean that we're all absolved from going to see the work in person. And I hope that we will at MCAD. And after Keith runs through his slideshow, he and Mike are going to engage in a conversation. And then we will invite you, the audience, to ask questions or make comments. If we continue to be a small group, we'll keep it as informal as possible. I want to encourage you to keep your video on so that we can see your beautiful faces. You're not forced to do that, but we would love it if you do. At the same time, we ask you to keep your microphones off so that if you have a barking dog in the background or something that doesn't become added to the mix. I want to thank my colleague Bailey Ethier, who's handling the tech this evening, and she is also recording this evening's program, and it will be archived on the ESFL YouTube page so that people will be able to watch it in the future. I just want to give a very brief introduction. Keith has long been devoted to the intersection of art and activism. He also was a longtime prof at St. Cloud State, from which he has, and I hesitate to use the word retired, but I suppose. And he's had a very special role with us at the East Side Freedom Library, designing our logo, creating our sign, and also creating this magnificent board game turn that allows players, participants to enter into the experience of the 34 Teamsters strike. There's a question about the recording. Everything that gets said will be on the recording, but the active speaker, Bailey says the active speaker only. Okay. Keith is also working on developing an archive, actually two archives, one about, again, activist artists, and another about the 34 Teamster strike and how it has been remembered. And we're excited to be part of that at the East Side Freedom Library. Mike Aliwitz calls himself the most censored artist in the world. I don't know. Fortunately, I've been able to see a lot of his work, so they haven't completely rubbed him out. Mike and I first met in the winter of 1986 when he came to Minnesota during the Hormel strike and led a remarkable project that got more than 100 strikers and family members and supporters to participate in the painting of a mural a mural that was ultimately dedicated to Nelson Mandela, and led an activist from the labor movement in South Africa to come to Austin to receive that dedication of the mural. Mike taught for many years at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, from which he has also retired, and is creating and maintaining his own archive and his own museum, remarkably in my hometown of New London, Connecticut, called Red Square. And I urge you to visit both Keith's website and Mike's website, look at their work. There's a wonderful published collection of Mike's work called Insurgent Images, which we have copies of at the Eastside Freedom Library. And I'm really excited and honored to have both of them with us this evening. So I believe that we also have the option of putting our screen in speaker view. I encourage you to try that now that I'm done speaking so that you don't have to look at me. And if you have questions in the meanwhile, post them in the chat, and Bailey and I will be tracking those questions to pass along to Keith and Mike. So Keith, we're all yours. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I really feel privileged and honored to be here. Thanks everyone for attending this Zoom presentation. It really means a lot to me, and I appreciate the time you're spending observing this. I have a few prepared remarks I'd like to read. And let me ask Peter, is it working okay? This is my first time. Okay.
Fine.
Okay. So I've been proud to support the Eastside Freedom Library in ways that I can. It's a great model for grassroots community building. It promotes agency and solidarity on the path to social justice. The library's collections, programming, housing justice advocacy, and organizing of communities are true movement work. It's a kind of unique place that helps change this world for the better. I want to thank Bailey Ethier for handling the technology and recording of this Zoom conversation. She's an amazing talent and a joy to work with. She gets things done, and always with her great smile. I'm so glad I've been able to work with Bailey and the others on the library's communications team, who all have worked so hard and so well to share the many activities of the library to the community. Thanks, Mike, for participating in this presentation. I also want to say that I'm grateful to Ellen Mueller and the MCAD for hosting the exhibition. I want to acknowledge that this work has been supported by the Artist Initiative Grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board and the National Endowment for the Arts. So I'm going to go now to the screen. And I'm going to start up, I guess. I first asked Mike to be a part of a discussion that I thought would be a presentation of both of our works. We are very different, but have shared similar paths. However, Mike insisted, because of the limited time, that this presentation be focused on my latest book, an exhibition that's called See and Say Time. He said that if people would like to know more about his work, that one source is his own Facebook page. I invite everyone to check it out. It's excellent. He shares his experiences and project work there, along with his humor and strong opinions. There's also the book Insurgent Images that Peter had mentioned earlier. The book is co-written with Paul Buhle, and it's published by Monthly Review Press. It chronicles Mike's journey as an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War and his involvement with the tragic protests at Kent State University in 1970, where other student protesters were murdered and he was nearly killed. The book provides numerous photos of his activities and projects. He has created many artworks since the book and established a mural art program at Central Connecticut State University, where he taught for many years. So I'm going to move on here. I want to start this slide with the words, see something, say something. The message is part of all traveling experiences now, since 9/11/2001. It has a special kind of relevance to visual artists who base their work on seeing. I like that it implies that it's not enough. You have to do something. I do want to add the imperative and then act. And I also add, damn it, as my mentor in college, Kinji Akagawa, used to do after many of his talks with students. He was so encouraging and personal. He'd say things to students like, the work you did was really great. Now do more of it. Damn it. So he made everyone smile. I always appreciated that. This presentation is structured in 4 parts. I'll start with a brief showing of Mike's work taken from his book. I'll show some of my own early work and share some of those experiences. I'll reference to the Minneapolis trucker strike of 1934 because it's an important historical influence on my work. Finally, I will present images from the book and upcoming exhibition. Oops, sorry. So here's a cover of the book, Insurgent Images, with Paul Buhle.
Designed by Keith Christensen, which we have to say here. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thanks, Mike. I was getting to that, but I did serve as a designer. I did serve as a designer, and it was actually a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. The book is a rich compilation of Mike's many political art activities, banners, and murals, along with the stories that went with these experiences. He's painted murals all over the world, including Nicaragua, Ukraine, Iraq, and many in the US. It's filled with protest and labor history. And like I said, it was a pleasure to design it. This is a section from the Hormel mural that Mike was a part of and that Peter had talked about earlier. And let me start off with this, that Peter Rashleff has written the most important record of the 2-year strike entitled Hard Pressed in the Heartland. Workers resisted management's drive for concessions and fought for their rights. It was a bitter fight, a heartbreaking loss, yet empowering. Peter wrote, it offers useful perspectives for rebuilding a democratic, militant, community-based unionism that can succeed where today's bureaucratic unionism cannot. And I've really seen a lot of echoes from 1934 in this project, the grassroots organizing especially. So anyway, Mike organized the workers to co-create the mural on the wall surrounding the strike headquarters. And as Peter mentioned, it was dedicated to Nelson Mandela, which demonstrated its kind of universality. I wanted to show a couple of the spreads from the book. The top was from the Washington, D.C. pro-choice demonstrations in 1991. And I participated in that with many others. And on the right was a section on anti-police brutality signs in New York City. Mike's work has been very, very involved with police brutality issues since the beginning, and it's more than ever relevant today. The spread below is of the Centralia Mural in Washington State, done in 1997. It commemorates the Centralia massacre in 1919 after a wobbly-led lumber worker strike. Its centerpiece is of Wesley Everest, an activist murdered by a mob supported by the local lumber industry. It's one of the few monuments to the IWW anywhere. And let me ask Mike if there's anything to add at this point, and we can talk about it later too.
Oh.
Good. Well, let me start where I actually first met Mike. I met Mike at this mural dedication in New York City in 1995. This is called the La Lucha Continual mural in the East Village. It was created by art makers and the writer-artist Ava Cockcroft, who directed it. She was an inspiring person who wrote Toward a People's Art, the contemporary mural movement that was a major influence on community art. There were 34 participating artists on 24 murals. The mural project as a whole addressed issues relating to US intervention in Central America, apartheid in South Africa, and gentrification on the Lower East Side. I collaborated on the large section of it. My individual mural is at the bottom center. It's called Root of Loizaida. It was in collaboration with artist Tony Buxko. This project opened my world to community art murals and public art collaboration. It was also when I first met Mike, as I mentioned, and it led to many collaborations. I attended a reunion exhibition of the mural near this site in 2017. The mural itself no longer exists. The event celebrated a historic, ambitious project. It was exceptional because it tied topical political issues in with a community and artist collaboration. It has been documented on a website and is held in an archive at NYU. Ava Cockcroft passed away in 1999. The promotion of the mural's legacy continues with colleagues Jane Weissman, Camille Perretet, and Kristen Reed, among others. I wanted to show you some other involvements of mine, and these are magazine covers that I designed for the group PAD. And these were done in 1983 and 85. I served as the art director for the magazine and was also a participant in the group. PAD is an acronym for Political Art Documentation Distribution. It was an artist collective that promoted art activism through demonstrations, performances, street art installations, and exhibitions. It also collected an international political art archive, which today is housed at the MoMA in New York. Its stated goal was to provide artists an organized approach to society. I worked closely on it with writer, author of many books on public art and political art, Lucy Lepard, and she was the editor. The collective was formed with artists, educators, and writers, including Greg Cholette, Janet Koenig, Jerry Kearns, Mimi Smith, and others. PAD generated other activities, including Artists' Call Against the Intervention in Central America and numerous repo history sign projects. This slide is of a project I did in 2001. It's called the Freedom Game. It was selected for the Public Art Biennial at the Neuberger Museum at SUNY Purchase. It was a board game, kinetic sculpture. The letter form F for freedom turns on a metal pole and moves with it when touched or by a strong wind. There was a light yellow side and a dark gray side of it. It was influenced by the book, The Story of American Freedom by Eric Foner. Freedom has long been a contested concept in the US. For example, the South fought the Civil War for freedom, the freedom to own slaves. I've been interested in games as a vehicle for telling stories and promoting strategic action. I wanted to go now to a slide of a very influential book for myself called Teamster Rebellion, written by Farrell Dobbs, all about the Minneapolis trucker strike of 1934. It's a firsthand account that tells the story of one of the most dramatic strikes in US history. I read it while in New York City, and actually Mike Aliwitz gave it to me. It was inspiring for me as a Minnesotan to read of such an important event in my home state. It's a story that holds many lessons, including how the strikers organized the strike during the heart of the Depression. The opposition to their forming union of truck drivers was fierce, led by the Citizens Alliance, an anti-union employers group. The strike has had many creative innovations, including roving pickets, lookouts by high school boys on motorcycles, the women's auxiliary that fed and nursed the wounded. There was the organizer, a strike newspaper that shared news as it unfolded with the strikers. Here's one of the iconic photos of the strike in May of 1934, when at the marketplace in Minneapolis, the police with their deputies fought with the strikers. And there was I think hundreds of men, women actually too, combating for the right to strike and the right to recognize themselves in a union. People died. It was a bloody fight. Here's some other photographs from the conflict. Police and deputies struggling. And then we have a picture in the lower right of what I think is one of the heroes of the revolution, of the strike, and of the efforts that were made for the unionization. Mr. V.R. Dunn, Vincent Dunn, who was arrested by the National Guard. Here are other images from the strike. The one in the upper right is of the Women's Auxiliary serving the strikers. The lower right is of a truck overturned, presumably for trying to break the strike. And finally, on the left is the organizer, the newspaper of the strike, declaring victory in August of '34. So I wanted to start now with my project called See and Say Time. Actions, Portraits, and Paintings is the book that I designed, and it is led to the exhibition that I'm showing starting next Wednesday at MCAD. I'd like to start with a spread of the page, and this is because it starts with a plaque that I designed, and I was part of the collective that helped prepare this for the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. It was installed in the anniversary of the North Loop location on Bloody Friday event of the strike. And let me say again, this was an outcome, and it was an effort by this whole collective called Remember 1934 that I've been really influenced by and really glad to be a participant in through many years, way before I became involved. But every 5 years there would be an event, either a street festival event or a picnic commemorating the strike and continuing the legacy of the strike that really made Minneapolis a union town and changed labor history in the country for decades. I wanted to point out about the image. I don't know if you can see it on your screen. I can't on mine, but there's an image of on the far right of Mildred Johnson, who was the last surviving participant in the strike, and she came to the dedication of the plaque that we set up in 2015. Here's some more pictures from the activities of the Remember 1934 group. On the upper left is a parade of the Teamsters 120. And on the right is a poster that I designed for this event. In the lower left is a picture of a group of descendants of the strikers who've been very active, very supportive of commemorating this strike. I wanted to go to another spread from my book, and it shows how I've kind of interpreted it and tried to extend this experience of the strike and the commemoration of it. On the upper left is a map of the strike that indicates where certain events happened. There was a Bloody Friday event, there was a Deputies Run event, and there were all kinds of activities throughout Minneapolis. And it's a historical moment that I was glad to be able to kind of articulate visually. On the other side of it is Game Turn, the book. It's a 50-page book. It documents the project, but also some of the history. We have writings and historical summaries of the strike in it. In the lower left are game mechanics, elements for the game, cards. And then on the right is the installation of it. On the lower right is a picture of some people playing the game, including in the front, Linda Layton, who's the granddaughter of V.R. Dunn, and behind her is her brother, David Sundin, who is also the grandson of Viardon. So it was really great to have them there for that opening and to keep in touch with them about our efforts. Here is a kind of more of a bigger picture of the game design, including some of the elements, the cards. I wanted to point out that there's a color coding of the cards in categories, including problems and solutions and context and events and background, as well as the pros and cons. So it was an attempt to show someone who was playing this game and understanding the strike that there was problems with the strike, including the police, including the Citizens Alliance, and then there were solutions. One of them being the organizer, the publication, and the Women's Auxiliary. So they went through a lot of challenges, but they persevered, and it's really I think a good lesson for as we go forward to remember and to understand how they dealt with the issues there. I wanted to leave 1934 to start showing some of the posters that I designed. And I have to say that the purpose of my exhibition was to try and tie in some way 1934, that heroic strike, with what was going on today. And that's why I actually call this whole project the See and Say Time project, the book and the exhibition. Because when Trump came in after his election in 2016, it was mind-numbing for a lot of us. And so I, along with many others, started finding ways to organize and to react to it. And the way I could work was with posters and demonstrations. So I wanted to say Trump activated many of us to do what we could to resist his brand of autocracy. The killing of George Floyd brought an explosion of outrage. On the left is a group using posters at the Women's March in 2019 at the Minnesota State Capitol. I handmade the George Floyd Justice poster at a Minneapolis Government Center protest. I installed posters on the streets, and I contributed my posters with activist artist Leon Wang in his Kneel, Stand, Fight campaign during the protests during the Minnesota Super Bowl of 2018. And I shared posters of Trump's Minneapolis downtown visit in 2019. I was with thousands of others protesting Trump. I wanted to go to a section of my book, and it represents my project work for a number of years now on prisoners of conscience. The purpose was to honor the subjects who have been incarcerated and killed for their political activities. The human right of telling truth is a constant battle. I wanted to support that struggle with the work. On the upper left is a portrait of Eugene Debs, anti-World War I activist and activist lawyer and a socialist, ran for president, very influential individual. On the upper right is a portrait with Rachel Corrie, who was killed in Israel trying to stop the destruction of Palestinian homes. And I paired it with a game-like structure with words of Rachel Corrie to try to tell a story in a more filled-out way. On the on the lower left is Mr. Paul Buhle, who is a hero of mine as an educator. He wrote this great book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he influenced my own teaching for many years. But he in fact was a political prisoner of conscience and held in the Brazilian prisons during the coup in the 60s. And on the right is Chelsea Manning, as a whistleblower, revealed military abuses through WikiLeaks 2013. I wanted to go now to my section of what I call the stories. The painting series was meant to reflect on contemporary issues It was my way to process what was going on. It was a journey that witnessed current events to better understand them and to express my reaction. These visual opinions aren't neutral. The one on the right, lower right here, is called Protest, done in 2018. It includes a kind of an iconic image from the 34th strike. And I show a MAGA hat in the foreground and other protesters in the back. This is the painting called Nothing in Nature Exists Alone. It's a quote by Rachel Carson, who's kind of the godmother of environmentalism, who wrote, is a science writer in the 1960s, wrote The Silent Spring, hugely influential. And I paired her with a contemporary environmentalist, Bill McKibben, who confronts a compliant sheep figure who is absorbing Fox News host Hannity while all around is coming destruction. The next slide is of a pandemic dance, 2020. Seeing the Pandemic World, the dark days of the early pandemic. The book by the corpse with the words Fox News, virus hoax. So we all shared this moment, how overwhelming it was. And this was my personal reaction to it. It continues, of course, but boy, were those dark days for all of us. This is a painting that I call Minneapolis Woke Time 2020. It was made after the George Floyd murder. It's an attempt to connect the police brutality of the 34th strike with current conditions and protests. The 34th strike was filled with police brutality. The police were very brutal, and there were many demonstrations against police brutality in 1934. In fact, the Women's Auxiliary led one. And of course, we all know in Minneapolis what happened, and that struggle continues. So I wanted to tie those together with the work here. The next painting is called Seeing George Floyd. It includes the murder, the connection between police union head Bob Kroll and Mr. Trump, references the long history of police killing of Black people, including Emmett Till, the reference to the Walker Arts Center sculpture by German sculptor Katharina Frisch piece, Han Koch, that is a critique of imperial leaders, and I connected to the Confederate flag of slavery. The last slide I'm showing today is called Stop and Go, Struggle Over Democracy. We saw it with our own eyes. We watched as the vote, the root of democracy, was attacked and defended. Stacey Abrams, John Lewis, and others, including freedom rider Stokely Carmichael and local hero Claire O'Connor, fight back. She was from Minneapolis, who went with the freedom riders and is a hero of mine. So that was a way for me to deal with the issues of January 6th that, again, still continue. Thanks, everybody. So I've asked Mike to chip in where you will, and say what you wish.
Well, I think people really need to study Keith's work. The paintings are not simple, and he has a tremendous ability to take Agitprop into a whole new realm, and with this whole approach of magic realist kind of, there's all kinds of things to see in those paintings. There's nothing simplistic about it. You know, it's not, you know, I'm against police brutality. There's a lot, and that really characterizes a lot of this work. I think, you know, for most people, it may seem a little like, why this strike in 1934? And that's really because we've been robbed of our history, and people do not understand what a transformative time that was. The three strikes, the three great, strikes in the 34, the Toledo Autolite strike, the San Francisco General strike, and more than any other, the Minneapolis Teamsters strike, totally transformed life for workers in the United States, because it led basically to the formation of industrial unions. And the reason that, we have the reason we have some standard of living for working people is because of these incredible militant strikes that involved millions of people. It wasn't just, the Teamsters, but it inspired enormous strikes all over the place. There were big strike waves in 37, and everything from, drugstore, the corner drugstore, to all the basic industry and stuff. We've had struggles in this country for Black studies programs, for women's studies programs, for Latino studies programs. And because of that, we know more about Malcolm X. We know more about Marcus Garvey. We know more about the civil rights movement. We know more about the women's movement, and we know more about women and the contributions that they made. We have yet to wage that kind of fight for labor studies. We've been robbed of our history. We don't know our history. And, very few people know, for example, that May Day, the international holiday of the working class, was to commemorate the fight for the 8-hour day in Chicago and the frame up of the Haymarket marches. The whole world understands that we have this incredibly militant history, and yet we've been robbed of it in our own country. So using the 34 strike and bringing it into the social struggles today, not as nostalgia, because there are people who do labor things that are kind of nostalgic. A lot of labor studies stuff is like nostalgia. Oh, we kind of like the Wobblies, they wrote songs, they were fun, oh, these were the tough days for labor, but it's not really an issue now. And so there's a lot of nostalgia about these things. And the other thing there is tends to be kind of a simplistic approach, even for much of the art that's political that's produced today. There's George Floyd, that's his head on the thing, his head on the wall. And, we're outraged about these things that happen. But beyond that, what lessons are there to learn? How do you learn how to fight and prevent these things? And that's what characterizes all of this work. And so I feel very close to all this stuff, because this is basically what led to my becoming a socialist and spending my life doing this stuff. And also, when you look through this thread of work, going back to PAD, for example, this was very important. And it has not, I don't see a lot of that going on today. I'm out of most any loop these days, but PAD, just the name, Political Art Documentation and Distribution, the idea that you have to preserve this stuff, that it isn't enough just to do something, but it also has to be preserved and brought to people. It has to be pedagogical. And that's very important. And I'll say a word about the library here and what you guys are doing. It's wonderful. There should be, and there's no reason why there can't be, a library in every city in this country, because there's old radicals in every city. And this is a good thing for them to do. And it's true that Minneapolis had this fabulous, strike that occurred, and very important strike. But every city, every town has had important social struggles. It wasn't just, a few places that this happened. In New London, it happened. In New Britain, it happened. Everywhere, every town. It's just that the history's been suppressed. So, the idea of taking all this stuff, whether it's through a game or whatever, and bringing it into the social struggle today, very important, very important. And also very dangerous, which, you know, is why you don't get invited to a lot of stuff, Keith. You know, your work's not going to sell for $1 million. You know, we know this, right? But what could be more important? What could be more important than doing this? And, you know, it's going to be around for a long time. And we have some very important struggles coming ahead of us. If the species is going to survive, there will be very important struggles. And wow, there's some lessons in there that we really need to relearn. Anyway, so the learning about this stuff, I mean, there are places to go. You know, you can read Mary Delessure. You can, you know, find Keith's things. There's books like Teamster Power and stuff like that. But you have to go look for it. And I encourage everybody to do that. Anyway, so that's my response. I can ask you a question now. Is that okay?
I take your point about what was happening in the 80s of sort of, you know, it came out of the 60s, you know, the anti-war movement and the artists resistors league. But since the 80s, there's still been movement. The Occupy movement of the 2011, 2012 is extending that. And there's a lot of the young people are the inspiration for what's going on. This project that the East Side Freedom Library has hosted, the monument, I forget the word, monuments to the movement, monuments to the movement. All these billboards that people all over the Twin Cities were making are you know, having a life, and there's a lot of people committed to keeping it going. And it's not just here; it's all over the country and the world, actually. So it's part of the times, and it's really encouraging. I think that people, young people especially, are stepping up and you know, using everything they've got, including art, music, poetry, to make a difference, to make a change.
Well, I think, yeah, it's always related to what's going on in the movement during, you know, this, when you have a movement, this is when people understand the reason to make art. You know, it's like when P9 was on strike and we said, and I was walking past the wall and said, hey, we should put a mural up there. Boom, let's go do the mural. And I had to stay there and do the mural. And, you know, but for years before that, there could have been a mural. And, you know, the same thing, a lot of the stuff that was going on in New York, I think, came out of the solidarity movement with Central America. And, you know, all that, you know, the social movements that were going on. And I think Occupy actually gave birth in large part to a new art form I see developing, which is sign making. Used to be that you'd go to a demonstration and somebody would hand you a sign and, you know, you would march around with it. It might be union, it might be a slogan or whatever. But I've seen, and I pay attention to this, I'm an old sign painter, so I'm always watching these things, but people have become so inventive with their signs. Everybody makes their sign. It's funny, it's poignant, it's insightful, it's educational. People don't want to carry a pre-made sign. They want to make their best sign. And that is really how an art form begins. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, the way history unfolds is you have an Occupy, and it's a brief period where things kind of, you know, happen, and then it goes down. There's demonstrations against police terror, and then it goes down. Well, that's the way history unfolds. And so when it becomes more generalized, which I believe it will, then we're going to really see a lot of art begin to take off. So I'm pretty optimistic about that happening, because I don't think people are going to go meekly to species suicide. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point. Art isn't going to be just the posters and the banners and the murals. It's also going to be part of the change, right? The artists are going to be part of the leading it and part of the participation in it. And I know you've done that with your work, and I've supported that approach to art, is bring it into the movement. Don't keep it outside. Don't keep it specialized. Be useful.
Well, art has always come from basically the working class. It's when you hear these fancy symphonies, they were based on folk songs that, from Romania or wherever. And, what happens is that working people create, basically give rise to ideas. And then it's taken and becomes part of culture. And then we've certainly seen this with street art, which began as a rebellious movement and, was really illegal to do street art. Spray can artists were beaten and even killed. But then eventually it's co-opted and, now it's corporation sponsor, street art, and they have spray can art on their buildings. And I was teaching street art, and I saw it go from being an outlaw art form in a very brief time to being a career path. Young street artists would go out and try to get arrested, so they had some street cred, and meanwhile they were designing a new line of clothing to sell. But this has always been the history of culture. Rock and roll, began as a rebellious working class thing, and then so you had Elvis and Little Richard and people like that, and then they took that and gave us Pat Boone and whatever, and then eventually it goes back and forth, and it continues, and it's always continuing. Most artists struggle to find meaning in their work. That's the big struggle that artists have. I mean, there isn't a serious artist is always struggling to find meaning in their work. And I feel very lucky, and I know you feel the same way, that we were able to do work that is meaningful, that is important, that helps to create a better world. It's I've never sold a piece of work, and I am the most censored artist in the world. All my stuff's been destroyed, but people carry my stuff down the street, and and people play your games, and they look at the stuff, and for an artist, whatever your art form, whether you're a painter or theater or music, whatever, you may not be able to make money at it. You may not have a career in that sense, but you can always make art. There's always a way to make art. You can even if you have no materials, you can do street theater. You can write poetry. There's always a way to make art. And I've been some places in the world where they didn't have anything, and so they had to figure out how to do that. And when you do that, then your life becomes a lot more meaningful too. It's really, people who embark on doing that are very lucky people, and you get to give expression to a lot of people who are voiceless. I mean, looking at those in your book, Keith, I was very moved by the drawings of the freedom riders who got arrested. The drawings from the mugshots. I mean, it was like, wow. And someone who reads that, then suddenly it becomes a little more real, because I think, I think a lot of that comes through in the drawing. A lot of the struggle that those people were involved in comes through, as it does in a lot of your work.
I want to interject that we're fortunate to have Claire O'Connor here with us, and she was a freedom rider, and she is in the book and in the painting, one of the paintings too. So I honor you, Claire. Thank you for your work and your sacrifice.
Well, people, it's been a long time, you know, we don't live very long. So, you know, human beings don't live that long. And people don't remember, you know, unless you're old like I am, you know, then you remember what it was like even before the civil rights movement. I mean, I grew up in a little rural area that was a semi-rural area in Delaware, Joe Biden's state. And before it was right, I was just a little child, but my family was involved in the civil rights movement. My sister helped desegregate the University of Delaware, and we lived next to a little youth prison farm for Blacks, where they were kept in chicken coops, and it was a totally segregated society. It was a different world before the civil rights movement, before the anti-war movement, before the women. Anyone who thinks there were the good old days is seriously dreaming. You know, back then, you know, people were beating their wives, you know, and it just racist mobs, you know, the whole bit. And no, it was a dreadful thing. And so again, we have to relearn all that, because they try to sanitize all this stuff. You know, they take Martin Luther King and they have I Have a Dream, and, you know, like he was, you know, just like peace and love guy. No, he was more than that. He was a militant fighter who went to jail and, you know, stood up to the ruling class and gave his life to do it. And they try to sanitize her. You know, a lot of the people that we paint about, you know, they try to sanitize them, and we do what we can to unsanitize them, to show what they really are, which was militant fighters. They were people like us, just normal, regular people who history pushed forward. And because of what was necessary and the times that they lived in, they were able to become these individuals who led these transformative movements.
I want to jump in. Claire had posed a question in the chat, which I think is a good place to focus a little bit of this conversation. And that's like, not just about the content of your work, but the methods that you have used. And so, Mike, in your case, the participatory projects that you have done, where you have involved people who never thought of themselves as artists in helping to make the art that you were in a place to make. And Keith, I wonder about your proclivity to create games so that people participate in the art and in the stories that the art represents. So I want to ask both of you to reflect a little bit about the participatory methods that you've used in some of your art projects.
Can I go first, Mike?
Please do.
Well, thanks, Claire, for the question and the focus on the role of community in work. And I remember hearing that art is never made by one person alone, and I agree with that. And it's kind of important for contemporary artists, I believe, to find ways to connect to the community, to folks. And my own direction has been to use games a lot of times, because I see games as this kind of human endeavor and this kind of universal aspect of our humanity that engages through games. And it's a positive social thing, like music and poetry and other things. And so I've used it as almost a device to engage people with my portraits, but also my sculpture. And the game about the 1934 strike was an attempt, and I'm not saying it's a popular or hugely successful endeavor, but it was at least my endeavor to try to bring in folks to help them learn about it, but also engage them in the human capacity and the human level of just having a game exchange and try and build it from there. So I've tried through my own work to find ways and discover ways and create ways And it's a struggle and not always successful, but I've been adamant about that. Yes. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, just on the game thing, it's true. Not a lot of people are going to play the game relative to, Monopoly or Scrabble. But I think a lot of what we do and other people like us is that we provide models that, that it can be done, that you can do this. And I think what's really wonderful about the whole game thing is not the game itself, but this idea of that really comes at, it was really a central part of the Agitprop art from the early years of the Russian Revolution, where you make everything, you transform everything into art, and you use it in everyday life. They did everything. They designed teapots that were square. They designed buildings that would float in space. They had mass spectacles where children organized mass spectacles where tens of thousands of people. They had symphonies of factory whistles, where hundreds of factory whistles were, workers were organized. They did all this stuff, very imaginative things. It's pretty much been taken out of art history for that reason. But this is right in line with that, this kind of idea. Well, why wouldn't you use this game to do something like this? And it can apply to everything. And so I think it's the model that's an important thing. And I feel that same way about the way I've organized mural projects. And, the question you asked, Peter, about, I do have a somewhat different approach than most people to organizing what were called community murals. There's a lot of these projects that are going on right now for two reasons. One is that people are demanding them, but a lot of these towns, what they do is they want a mural about diversity, and they want a mural about diversity, but they don't want to do anything about genuine social change. So what you do is you paint a mural and you put John Lewis on there or somebody, and that's well, we've taken care of that. Now we don't have racism or police violence anymore, and that's what it's used. Mary Delessure, one of the great writers of this country, who is very influenced by the Minneapolis strike, she says they want you to perfume the sewers. She wrote this thing. She said, want you to perfume the sewers. I love it. It's one of the great speeches of all time. And that's what they want artists to do. They want us to perfume their sewers. They want us to paint pretty pictures that covers up the stench of what capitalism is doing to people in this world on every level, destroying our humanity. It's not just the police violence, it's the culture that we're bombarded with. And especially here in the United States, we have driven people to the point where you have young people, very young people, going in and shooting everybody. This is like about as far away from humanity as you can get. And these kids that are doing this stuff were victimized all along, and that's how they ended up doing this stuff. This is a really, really sick thing. And the response of more cops and more surveillance is going to make it worse. It's going to just feed on it. It's a decline of a system, and it's a very ugly thing that's happening. And until movements coalesce, if there were social movements for change, if we get a big workers movement, a big unionization, then young people will be attracted to that. And it will be a wonderful thing. I think that's what's going to happen. But back to what I was starting to say, Peter, about there's a lot of bad murals that are community murals, because what they do is they get a bunch of kids together and they say, what do you want to paint on the wall? And it ends up being, a few nice people from historic people that they don't really know much about, but they, and we would not do this with any other art form. We would not sit down and say, let's write a song. We would not say, let's write a poem. We would not invite, Bruce Springsteen in to lead people in writing one song. What you would do is you would have each person write a song and each person write a poem. And that's what I tried to do at CCSU. Every student painted their own mural. Occasionally we would do something for theater or whatever, but really you have to develop your own voice, and nobody's voice is the same. And so when I do mural projects like the P9 mural, really I took a strong hand in the overall design and what it meant and how it was. And then people were more or less filling in and adding good elements to it. But really, on most projects, instead of having a bunch of kids working with me, what I prefer is to have 2 or 3 kids who will be apprentices, who will go through the process, who I can leave behind as people who know how to do a mural project and can make a real contribution to the cities. And that has happened sometimes, and it's a great thing. And so now there are a lot of other ways to involve people around a mural project. We've had things where kids are all making ancillary things, they're making posters and things for demonstrations or whatever, as we're painting the mural. Fundraising is a very important part. We've gone to Palestine and Ukraine, and all these places to paint murals. People who give a little money become participants and become creators. Very important to raise money around these things, not just get a grant and go do something. Anyway, there's a lot of ways people can participate. You can have concerts, you can have all kinds of things. And that should be done. That should be done. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Well, why don't we open this up to more questions, comments? I see, I don't want to embarrass her, but Linda Layton has joined us. And hi, Linda. Great to have you with us. Please feel free to unmute everybody. And we're a small group, and weigh in with questions for Mike and Keith or comments, or please.
Well, I have a question for Keith.
Oh, all right.
Because Keith is very reticent about talking about his roots, and I am quite interested in how he came to be doing this work. He's not a big promoter of Keith, and he lets his work speak for itself, and it's powerful enough to do that. But I think I would like to know how you ended up on that wall in the Lower East Side, painting that mural. And even from that point, I think it's very interesting to note that a lot of the murals, certainly my own, are a lot more didactic than, it's like, and there's this root, and it's just this wonderful little magical thing. And even from that point, and all this stuff, it's in there. But why don't you tell us how you rode in on Montana and started doing this work? He had a horse named Montana.
I told Mike that I grew up in Southeast Minnesota and I had a horse, and he doesn't forget that. But you know what? We all have complicated lives and all these complexities, and we don't have one exact source for what we're doing. And I could say from a very early age, I wanted to be an artist. I just didn't know how. And I went to New York just to try to be the best artist I could be. And kind of a pivotal moment for me was the failures I was running into of not finding acceptance for my work, my studio work. And then there was a kind of a meeting of political art groups, muralists. Judy Baca was there, Lucy Lepard, Eva Cockcroft, all these today are very well-known folks. And it has inspired me and changed me to realize, hey, I don't have to be an artist in my studio. I can work with other artists for good causes, because I was certainly aware of the war and injustice, but I didn't see how I could relate to that as an artist. But then I found others who were, and so that was a big pivotal moment for myself. It led me to meeting you. But I have to say that the point of my show, this See and Say time, is really coming out of 2016, when we had this election of this neo-fascist, and it's a dark time, and we all faced that, everyone in this room here, with the pandemic. And it's about time. It's like, what do we do with our time? This is a pressing, I think, existential kind of threat to us. And it seems to me that that's kind of pushing me to try to do these latest paintings. I have to do something, and that's what's driving me today in a more focused way.
Well, this leads to a question I posed to you recently, and I didn't want you to answer, but you make these paintings, and you have these paintings. You said you don't sell. And I totally understand. If I ever made a painting like that, I wouldn't want to sell either. It's like, why would I want to give up this beautiful thing I created? So I totally understand what you're doing with the, when you do public art, when you do a mural, you painted a mural about the 34 Teamsters strike, you designed a game. This stuff is all agitprop work, and it has an audience out there and whatever. But how do you see your easel painting work fitting in with this?
Maybe
what do you want to happen? What do you want to happen with this work? We're getting old now, Keith. And what's going to happen?
Good point. Yeah, I understand my my place in the world is not huge or something, but don't I have the human right to express myself and to speak the truth in ways that I can, awkwardly as I can, maybe not as refined as possible, but I want to, as you've mentioned, be a model for others. If I can do it, you can do it. That's what I want to say with my work. Do something, say something, be truthful, speak about the issues of today. We need that. And I look to inspiration like Black Lives Matter. It's not a hierarchical, top-down situation. It's really grassroots. And that's what the role I want to play with the painting. And I think painting has a role in society. It's not as big as music or as film or something, but it still has a role, and it has a strong tradition, and it can be helpful for people understanding not only the ideas, but also the feelings that go with art forms like painting.
Well, I think, and good painting is, there's a reason that authoritarian governments always go after artists. And one of the reasons is, if you can learn to figure out what's in Keith Christensen's paintings and what they mean, then you also are going to figure out what's wrong with your government and why you need to get rid of it. And, it's because you learn to be a critical thinker. And, in our society, they try to make us consumers. The stuff that we're given, the music that they shove down our throats, and the popular culture is so dreadful, right? That there's nothing to really think about. You just consume it. And when you're faced with a challenging piece of work, and I think what's really works well in your stuff is it's both accessible. In other words, people recognize it and they can appreciate it on one, even people who are art illiterate, which is most of our society is art illiterate. We don't teach people about art. They don't grow up. We're a much more musical country. People are more knowledgeable about music, not so much about the visual arts. But it's accessible, they can appreciate it, but then they can also become engaged with it and really try to figure out. Like that figure, for example, from the Teamster strike, the guy swinging the bat at the Battle of Deputies Run. That was the name of the thing. It was the Battle of Deputies Run. And you would not necessarily, who would know what that was, right? The very few people. So you have to kind of figure it out. You know, and I do a lot of that stuff too. I throw black cats in and bread and roses and, you know, these symbols. Then people have to go, well, what's that about? You know? And I think that's a great thing. I think you managed to do that very successfully. I can see where doing the easel paintings is very helpful when you go to do a piece of public art too, because you get to work out your ideas in the studio in a way that you can't in a mural. I mean, once you're doing a mural, it's there, you know, it goes up on the wall and that's it. You know, you have to have really thought it through before you put it up there, because it's there. Well, in my case, it's usually not there very long. Anybody else, it's up there for a while. So,
yeah, can we hear from other folks? Comments, questions?
so
Connie, you had a question. Do you want to unmute and formulate it for us?
Hi, Peter. Yes,
Hi.
happy to. Let's see. I need to open the chat and remind myself what I asked. Oh yeah. You've talked about legacy a little bit, and the question is, how are you supporting the folks following you, like, you know, the next generation? Mike sort of spoke to that, but I'd love to hear Keith speak to that.
About legacy in terms of the visual arts, in terms of my own work. I didn't work for that really. I worked trying to be as authentic and genuine as I can. I have been an educator for a number of years, and it's been very gratifying to help young people learn skills and to go on with their careers, and that was highly gratifying for me. In terms of a legacy, I think I would go back to the role of a model. I'm trying to create a model. I'm trying to do what I think is genuine and truthful, and to see where it lands. And it can't be pleasing everyone, but it's my best effort for myself.
One of the things is, you know, like I thought the work you did with PAD, well, I thought PAD was very important. And, you know, the fact that you created this visual record of it, which is great to look at even, you know, not too much from those times was all that well designed, as I'm sure you know. That stuff, you know, again, needs to be accessed. People need, there's a lot of information in there. And there's a lot of ideas, because it was all these figures that you pointed out, Lucy Lepard and Judy Baca and all these people who are doing this stuff that needs to be brought into stuff. You know, when I started the mural course at CCSU and I went to look and see, I was going to find somebody's syllabus to copy, and I realized that there was not one single mural course in any school in the United States. And I mean, I learned how to paint murals because I was a billboard painter. So that's who knew how to paint murals. And so I constructed a thing. And similarly, when I went to, I wanted to start a street art course, same thing. I went to look, there was no street art course anywhere. And it was like, how can this be? This is the largest visual art movement in human history. Every night, tens of thousands of kids are going out. They're facing, you know, repression. They're going out, they're pouring their hearts onto walls, and not one course. And it's so revealing about the nature of art and art institutions and the gallery system. You know, it's just, if you're not creating little rectangles that people can buy and invest in, then, you know, it's not really considered art. And until they were able to co-opt it, and then it became something else. So, you know, and I know, for example, you had each of your students create a book, which I think is amazing. Of course, totally doable when you think about it, but I really wonder how many people are doing something like that, you know, and so much of the design stuff that I've seen is really just, you know, designed to plug people into corporate jobs producing crap. And of course, I spent a good part of my life producing crap as a sign painter and a billboard painter. I mean, you gotta, we all in one way or another end up having to do that in order to survive. I mean, we are workers and we sell our labor power. But really, I think that's all part, having books, even this book right now, okay, is it going to be a bestseller? No. But are people going to find it? Yeah, they'll find it when they're looking for it. They'll find it. Right now, maybe there's not a lot of people looking for it, but that's going to happen. I think so. I mean, I'm optimistic about the future because I think young people are very smart. They're very knowledgeable about the world today, much more than we were in the 60s and 70s. You know, they have the internet. They've gone through the women's movement. They're better people. They're more sensitive to each other. They listen to each other. You know, now they haven't really faced much in the way of struggle, but that'll happen. But I'm optimistic. Now, will fundamental social change happen in time for us to really avoid enormous losses of human beings? I don't know. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that, you know, the planet as it is now able to sustain us is in serious jeopardy. And, you know, socialism may take place on the rafts as we're floating, floating out to sea.
But Linda, did you want to ask something or say something? Your hand, please.
I don't know what I can add. I admire both of your art. I think I can say that I'm a friend of Keith's and we communicate sometimes. Mike, I've never met you. I am a longtime member of the IWW in the Twin Cities. And I loved your comment about there not being any wobbly art. Well, there is and there isn't, but yeah, not murals. And then I want to ask you, Mike, do you know who John Fleischner is? He's in Milwaukee.
No, I will say that as far as I know, I'm the premier painter of murals about wobblies.
Yes, that's the way I know. That's the way I know of you.
Yeah, and
John
you know
Fleischner,
what?
Yeah.
And
So,
this is also very telling. You know, why isn't there more? You know, including from the wobblies themselves. There's, you know, I've had, you know, I know a lot of wobblies. I am actually a formal member of the wobblies for 20 some years or whatever. But really, it's more of a cultural thing for me
yes.
because, you know, really, you know, industrial unions came along and, you know, so, you know, the Communist Party came along and the IWW as what it was is no longer. It's something else. And there's when I mentioned nostalgia, I think there's a lot of nostalgia about the IWW, which is right in this case, because they were a class struggle, wonderful militant part of our history. But I don't see a lot of why aren't today's wobblies doing what the wobblies they admire did? You know?
I would tend to agree with you. I really would. My
Yeah.
brother, who was also a wobbly, did some screen prints and did some t-shirts that were wobbly art that were just very local to the Twin Cities, really. And I was part of the Remember 34. My grandfather is Vincent Dunn, Ray Dunn, from the 34 strikes. So I've been familiar with this my entire life. I don't know. I agree with you. I wish there was more art like that done.
Well, I think again, it percolates around, it's there, and so, things in history develop very unevenly. And, so what you have today, you don't have anything generalized today. There's things that happen here, there. The Amazon workers just organized, in Staten Island. This is a great thing.
Big deal.
Yeah, and yeah, I know the Wobblies are involved in organizing baristas and stuff here or there. And all of this stuff, it's like percolating around, right? But there hasn't been a general uprising. And it will come. It will be, because it always has come. That's the history of this country, and
I agree.
And I've lived through it. I saw it, right? I saw in 1968, I started going to Kent, and I organized my first demonstration in high school, and I got beat up into a war demonstration. And then I was involved in organizing GIs, and the GIs forced an end to the war.
Yep.
I mean, they refused to fight in Vietnam. They started fragging their own officers. This was amazing. You will never convince me.
Another lost history. I'm telling you, I know about that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I saw that, and so therefore you will never convince me that American workers are incapable of dramatic social change. I've seen it. I've lived it. I have total, absolute confidence in their ability to do this, and I feel very optimistic about the young people today. Enormous challenges that we didn't face, assuming you're somewhere in my, general age bracket someplace. But we had to end the war. We had to do things like that. But geez, I mean, what a job young people have today. You have to try to save the species and stop, deal with a mass extinction. It's like, wow. That's a lot. That's a lot. So people are going to figure out all this stuff. They're going to invent new things. We were talking about the Occupy stuff before. I remember the first time I went to an Occupy thing, and they had, I forget what you call it, the human chorus, where they didn't have the human microphone, I think.
Yep.
Mic check.
Yeah.
Mic check. Yep.
I was like, this is brilliant. Why didn't we ever do this before? It was like this incredible creative thing. And I was like, and a lot of stuff that came out of Occupy was like that, I thought. And like Keith was saying, the Black Lives Matter stuff. I mean, this is where you get creative ideas from, I mean, this is what generates it.
I want to ask Brooks Turner if he'd like to unmute his mic and ask his question. Brooks, are you still with us? Unable to unmute? Well, I'll read your question then.
Good.
So Brooks asked that he's picking up on a question that Claire also put in the chat about Paulo Freire and Keith's reference to Freire and how Freire might have been an influence in Keith's work. But Brooks goes on to ask Keith in particular if you could speak to how militancy and pedagogy interact in and through your work.
I'm glad to have you here, Brooks. I know you're doing really interesting work researching the silver shirts of the 30s. But in any case, how do we position militancy in our own work? How do we promote that. I do think of it as kind of historically, like Paulo Freire was engaging the illiterates in Brazil, and he was giving them tools to face their oppression, and it was truthful, and they got that, and then they self-organized so many times. I mean, I think the truth is really a kind of a key factor, informing people, letting people know about the problems, letting them see their own problems, see their own solutions. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to do with my own work, is to let history speak out, let values speak out, and see where that goes.
I didn't really know too much about him until later. I was pretty old by the time, because I did a mural at Highlander, so I became familiar with Miles Horton, which led me to Paulo Freire and everything. And it was like one of these wonderful things you discover. And it's like, how did I miss this? But just the whole approach, to me, it's like, oh, we're going to get people to think, and it has an enormous impact. I mean,
he was strategic too. He would write about naming your oppressor, as a kind of a strategic method for seeing your oppression and seeing your problems, not thinking of, well, it's just the way it is. No, it's not the way it is. It's that bank down the road that's taking, calling on the loans or something that's causing you the oppression. So naming your oppressor was an important strategic kind of thought for me and in my work and my teaching too.
Well, the truth is, we don't have a lot of people doing that today. And everything is equivocation, and everything is trying to figure out electoral strategies, on none of which work or do anything for people. And you don't have a lot of people basically calling things the way they are. Of course, a lot of that is because there are, any young Black person who starts to speak their mind ends up in prison or dead. And, they've become very good at eliminating things at the root. But the fact of the matter is, we need to have people do that. And, I think we both do that in our work. And oftentimes, I think people look at you askance. Like, why are you doing that? They're going to tear that down. But, fortunately, if you're in a position where you can do this, and that's why I think we have a big responsibility. Those of us who are lucky enough to be able to do this work have a responsibility to the people who clothe us and feed us, and who created the resources for us to do this work. When you go to paint on a canvas, someone wove that canvas, someone built, and to go to the archives, and what you do at the library, and what in our own little way we do at Red Square, I feel a big responsibility. Even though the mural gets destroyed, I feel like I have a responsibility to the people who inspired that work. I have a responsibility to the P9ers to try to preserve this part of history, to the miners, and all these people. I think all of us have that responsibility. I think if you're an artist, then you really have to consider that as your responsibility. Any artist. I don't think all artists should necessarily be doing political stuff, and I don't really care for it when people who are not political try to do political art, because I think you have to be honest in your art. If you want to do little intimate poems about your sexuality, then that's what you should do. But we can all have that knowledge enter into our work. I think that's what, somebody like Cezanne, he paints a bowl of fruit. No, not really. It's it's about the whole decline of capitalism in the world and what was happening and the tensions with these things. So, you know, I just think that that's what we have to do. And people are going to find this stuff at some point.
Well,
Freedom Library is a very good example of what needs to be done. And I'm really, it's, you know, we have to, I think you guys have to try to spread that idea around. I'm sure you do. But really, why couldn't there be similar? I don't see a lot of similar things going on. Why is that? So that's a question for you, I guess, Peter.
Well, there is this thing called the nonprofit industrial complex that has a certain impact, as you were saying, you know, about murals that put diversity on the wall, but end the conversation at that point. And but I do want to just mention that we will be hosting a writing workshop on Saturday the 11th, led by Allison Morse, called Stories We Wear. And she bookends her work with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and the Rana Plaza building collapse, and wants people to come and reflect on where our clothing, who made our clothing, and under what circumstances, and use that to write from. And she will be doing this workshop on Saturday the 11th, and there will be a public reading of what people produce on Wednesday evening, the 15th. So the nice thing about being the East Side Freedom Library is that we can tap into multiple art forms. We have Claire O'Connor's wonderful Teapot on a Rocker, which is a comment on Highlander, and on our multiple rocking chairs at the East Side Freedom Library. Lots of imagery. Who knows what will trigger some young person to ask questions and to sit down and play Keith's board game, or to make Claire's rocker rock, and think about what is this all about, and how are all these things connected, and how can I contribute? And Connie, who's with us tonight, is doing this kind of work in music. And it's been too long, Connie, since we've had you at the library motivating people to sing. And we need to work on that. We are learning about the wonders of our front lawn, and maybe we could have singing on the front lawn, and the neighbors would wonder what's going on. And they may want to come over and add to the chorus. So we're about out of time. Keith and Mike, thank you so much for sharing your work and your time and your thoughts with us. Again, Keith, the show is running from June 8th to
The 24th.
To the 24th.
MCAD MFA Gallery.
The MFA Gallery at MCAD. And the opening is on Wednesday the 8th from 5 to 7. Come on over and see it. Come into the East Side Freedom Library and look at a copy of Mike Alewitz's Insurgent Images.
Designed by Keith.
And the absolutely wonderful large photograph of the mural that was sandblasted in Austin.
Yeah.
And the rich images in that mural. Lots to see and do. Thank you everyone for coming. Again, Bailey, thank you for handling the tech. And we will have this video up on the YouTube page soon, and we can circulate it around. Thank you all. Last words.
You can buy
Mike?
Keith's book on Amazon, and it's just a beautiful little gem. I've got a couple already for people for gifts, and it's just a really wonderful little thing. It's just a little gem, really. And there's some very moving things in there. Congratulations, Keith.
Thank you.
It's really.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.